In the theory of justice, Rawls analyzes three systems or doctrines: feudal system, libertarian, and meritocracy. He argues that under these three systems or doctrines, distribution of wealth and income is based on various contingencies, which create inequality. Therefore, these systems and doctrines are unfair, and no one morally deserves achievements based on these contingencies. I think Rawls' argument has obvious flaws. First, Rawls argues that feudal system is unfair because it distributes income, wealth, opportunities, and power according to the accident of birth. If a person is born into an aristocratic family, he can directly inherit the power and wealth from the family. In this argument, Rawls makes a mistake. The biggest unfairness under the feudal system is not birth. Under feudal system, if the king appreciates a commoner, the commoner can immediately become a nobleman. If any nobleman offends the king, he would be demoted to a commoner or even executed. The king himself is no exception. Once someone seizes the throne, the king will be immediately reduced to a prisoner. And the person who seizes the throne will become the king. Obviously, a person born into an aristocratic family does not guarantee that he will maintain his noble status forever. There is only one way for anyone to maintain the status of a nobleman all the time, and that is to always hold power. After anyone has power, he can allocate resources to anyone as long as he wants, and he can also encroach on other people's legitimate resources at any time. Once any nobleman loses power, he cannot arbitrarily allocate resources, nor can he encroach on other people's resources. The nobleman immediately became a commoner. Obviously, it is power rather than ability that determines the allocation of resources, so in such a society, everyone can only pursue power frantically instead of creating wealth, which leads to a very low level of total social wealth. It was precisely because unchecked power caused great injustice that after the Glorious Revolution in England, the Parliament deprived the king of most of the powers, which were the powers to allocate various resources. However, the Parliament didn't deprive the king of his right to inherit the throne. If the greatest injustice was caused by birth, the Parliament should first of all deprive the king of his right to inherit the throne. Second, Rawls argues that distribution under libertarian is also unfair. Libertarian achieves equality of opportunity, but it is only formal equality. In fact, there are still many inequalities in society. The most obvious inequality is the education inequality. Wealthy families can afford to have a good education for their children, while many children from poor families may not be able to afford to go to school. The education inequality is like the runners start from different starting points. Such a race is definitely unfair. To correct the unfairness, meritocracy proposes a solution that provides access to education for all. This scheme ensures that all runners start from the same starting line. However, Rawls argues that the distribution under meritocracy is still unfair. His reason is that some runners are born to run faster than others. It is the inequality of natural talents. The level of a person's wealth and income is determined by the level of his natural talents. Obviously, the inequality of natural talents is also unfair. Rawls argues that the only way to correct this unfairness is to implement the difference principle. Social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are to be of the greatest benefit to the least advantaged members of society. I don't think Rawls' argument is convincing. What is the purpose of the race? Undoubtedly, it is to select runners who run fast. How can fast runners be selected? The race must be fair, which means that all runners must be on the same starting line. What is the purpose of selecting fast runners? Rawls does not answer, he only says that the runners who run fast are naturally talented. Knowing that the fast runners are naturally talented people, why is the race still going on? It can only show that the purpose of the race is to select people with high natural talents. Why does the system select people with high natural talents? The answer is the basic knowledge of economics. We know that resource utilization varies from person to person. People with high natural talents have high resource utilization, so they can create high social wealth. People with low natural talents have low natural utilization and can only create very low social wealth. Therefore, in order to maximize social wealth, we have to rank all people in order of natural talent from highest to lowest. Those with the highest natural talents must be allocated the most resources, and those with the lowest natural talents can only be allocated the least resources. This method is the most efficient way of resource allocation. Other allocation methods inevitably lead to different degrees of resource misallocation. The consequence is a serious decline in the overall utility of society. Rawls is also aware of this problem, so he makes a compromise. The difference principle permits conditional inequality. However, even with compromise, the difference principle will still lead to a misallocation of resources. If this misallocation leads to a significant decrease in the overall utility of society, it is unfair to all. So a paradoxical scene appeared. The difference principle is intended to correct injustice, but it creates even greater injustice. Of course, not only Rawls' theory has this problem, but most theories have this problem. These theories only protect the interests of a certain group, not the interests of the whole. The price of protecting the interests of one certain group can only be to constantly sacrifice the interests of other groups. However, very few people will voluntarily sacrifice their own interests. We can only force individuals to sacrifice their own interests, which violates the rights of individuals. The difference principle permits taking a portion of the wealth of the rich to help the poor, which clearly violates the rights of the rich. Violation of individual rights is not a problem for consequentialism, because consequentialism is concerned with the overall consequences. If an action has more advantages than disadvantages on the whole, the action is permitted even if it violates individual rights. But other theories are the opposite. These theories, including Rawls' theory of justice, are based on the inviolability of individual rights. Since individual rights are inviolable, Rawls has to find a reason to argue that his difference principle does not violate individual rights. So he presents the theory that no one morally deserves achievements based on natural talents. However, violation is violation. We should never justify it. Because if we can find reasons to justify a violation, we can find reasons to justify any violation.